The situation in Manipur, particularly concerning the UN National Liberation Front, UNLF, and its activities has escalated to alarming levels, creating a grave security and humanitarian crisis in the region. The UNLF, an armed separatist group, has not only disrupted the delicate balance between various ethnic communities in the state, but has also posed significant challenges to the Indian state's law enforcement apparatus. The violent actions and unchecked movement of these militants have led to widespread displacement, destruction, and growing tensions, especially for the Kookie community. UNLF's unchecked movement, one of the most concerning aspects of the current crisis is the ability of UNLF militants to operate with impunity, free from significant resistance from both state and central authorities. Despite the presence of Indian security forces in the region, the UNLF is able to move freely, often in plain sight, without facing any substantial restrictions. Militants from the group are regularly seen in public spaces, in possession of sophisticated weapons and equipped with military-grade equipment, including bombs, assault rifles, and even bulletproof vehicles that are typically reserved for the use of state police. This freedom of movement is not only a symbol of the militants' growing power, but also an indication of the failure of the state's security infrastructure to contain the insurgency. The fact that these militants can move about with sophisticated arms and in armored vehicles that are meant for police use highlights the sheer scale of the insurgency and the inability of the state machinery to curb such activities. That the Kookie community's plight. While the UNLF has primarily been associated with the Métis community's desire for greater autonomy and independence, the impact of their violence has been disproportionately felt by the Kookie people, a significant ethnic minority in the state. Over the years, the Kookies have been subjected to systemic attacks and violence perpetrated by insurgent groups, and the recent escalation of UNLF-led violence has only exacerbated this long-standing persecution. Over 200 Kookie villages have been destroyed in recent years, leaving over 700 Kookie individuals displaced from their homes. This scale of destruction is unprecedented and reflects the gravity of the ethnic violence plaguing the region. Entire communities have been uprooted, forced to flee their homes to avoid violent retribution. So the majority of these displaced people now live in overcrowded refugee camps where access to food, medical aid, and basic living conditions is limited. The attacks are not just physical, but psychological as well. The trauma of losing homes, livelihoods, and loved ones is compounded by a constant sense of insecurity. Many Kookie families face an uncertain future, with no clear resolution in sight. The targeted violence against the Kookie people seems to be part of a larger strategy aimed at weakening their presence in the region, furthering the Métis dominance, and asserting control over contested territories. State police involvement and escalation of violence. In addition to the actions of the UNLF, the role of state police forces in Manipur has also contributed significantly to the escalation of violence. The state police, instead of acting as neutral protectors of law and order, have often sided with the Métis militants, or at times have been directly involved in attacking Kookie villages. The use of armored vehicles, typically used by the police for crowd control or counterinsurgency operations, has been reported in several instances where Kookie settlements, where police forces have targeted Kookie settlements. These heavy-handed tactics have only fueled further resentment and mistrust between the Kookie community and the state authorities. Furthermore, the police have frequently been accused of being complicit in the violence, either by directly participating in attacks or by turning a blind eye to the activities of the insurgents. This lack of accountability among law enforcement agencies has created an atmosphere of lawlessness where both militants and state forces appear to operate without consequence, leaving civilians to bear the brunt of the conflict. Humanitarian crisis. The violence in Manipur has led to an unprecedented humanitarian crisis, particularly for the Kookie community. With large numbers of villages burned and destroyed, many Kookies have been forced to live in temporary shelters or refugee camps. The lack of adequate housing, access to clean water, healthcare, and food has worsened the living conditions of displaced families. Diseases, malnutrition, and a lack of basic medical care are rampant in these makeshift camps, where large numbers of women and children live in fear of further attacks. And the crisis is not only a result of physical violence, but also the collapse of infrastructure in these areas. Many Kookies have lost their homes, agricultural lands, and businesses, leaving them with little means of survival. The failure of the state government to provide aid to the displaced populations has further exacerbated the suffering of the Kookie people, leaving them to fend for themselves in an increasingly hostile environment. Whether it's for labor communities, labor existences, labor environment, through the night, national security concerns. The situation in Manipur is not just a regional issue, but one that threatens the broader security of India. The ability of Unlf militants to travel freely across the region and potentially across the country has raised serious concerns about the spread of insurgency and terrorism beyond the state borders. There are reports that insurgent groups operating in Manipur have links with other militant organizations in neighboring states, and even with other groups. That these connections heighten the security risks not just for the people of Manipur, but for the entire Northeast and, by extension, the rest of India. The militants' access to advanced weaponry, including explosives and armored vehicles, also poses a serious threat to public safety as the potential for large-scale attacks increases. With the growing presence of insurgents in urban areas, the threat of violence in public spaces, markets, transportation hubs, and government buildings has become a real concern for citizens and security forces alike. Moreover, the free movement of these armed militants across state lines raises the risk of violence spilling over into neighboring regions, especially in other parts of the Northeast, where similar ethnic tensions exist. The government's failure to contain the situation in Manipur could set a dangerous precedent for other insurgent movements across the country, threatening national security and sovereignty. Political implications, the violence and instability in Manipur also have significant political implications. The continued ethnic violence and the apparent inability of the state government to effectively address the concerns of all communities in the region has further deepened political divisions. The Métis community's demand for greater political autonomy is pitted against the Kookies' demand for protection and equal treatment, leading to a polarization of the political landscape. The failure of successive governments to address these issues through dialogue and peaceful means has only fueled the belief that armed struggle is the only way forward for marginalized communities. This is a dangerous trajectory as it encourages more groups to take up arms, potentially destabilizing the entire region. Additionally, the ongoing violence has led to strained relationships between the state of Manipur and the central government. The apparent indifference of both local and national authorities to the plight of the Kookie people has eroded trust in the state apparatus, further complicating efforts to find a lasting solution to the crisis. An international dimension. The conflict in Manipur also carries broader international implications, especially given the proximity of the region to international borders. The movement of refugees across the India-Myanmar border, as well as the potential for cross-border arms trafficking, could destabilize not only India's northeastern region, but also neighboring countries. The influx of refugees has placed immense strain on neighboring states, particularly Myanmar, which has its own internal conflicts. Furthermore, the ability of insurgent groups to expand their operations beyond India's borders. Meitei terrorists linked with foreign support, like Chinese military, Bangladesh and Myanmar junta government, India government, must crack down Meitei terrorist group at the earliest. Otherwise, danger for all Indians, especially to the Kookies, separate administration for the Kookies. Now may be ceasefire with Indian government. However, at later stage, they are ready to fight Indian security forces is the next target move. The situation concerning the Meitei community and their alleged connections with external entities such as the Chinese military and the junta government of Myanmar and Bangladesh raises serious concerns regarding national security in India, calls for the government to take immediate action against what is described as Meitei terrorist groups, point to a perceived threat, particularly towards the Kookie community, which may necessitate a specific administrative arrangement for their protection. While a ceasefire with the Indian government may currently be in place, the potential for renewed conflict with Indian security forces looms on the horizon, indicating that a resolution is urgently needed to prevent escalation and ensure stability in the region. And the situation in Manipur, particularly the unchecked rise of violence fueled by groups like the Unlf and the complicity of state forces, has created an alarming crisis for the Kookie community and for India as a whole. The ability of militants to travel freely, armed with sophisticated weapons and protected by bulletproof vehicles, highlights the failure of the state apparatus to control the destruction of villages and the displacement of tens of thousands of people, have turned the region into a humanitarian crisis with no clear resolution in sight. And the Indian government must take urgent and decisive action to address the underlying causes of the conflict, focusing on resolving ethnic divisions, ensuring the protection of minority communities, and restoring law and order. Without such intervention, the violence in Manipur is likely to continue, with far-seeking consequences for both regional stability and national security. One disclaimer, we don't own the article and videos used. Here, rights are given to respective rightful owners. Please subscribe Zalengam Media for more insightful videos and share the video. Thank you very much for watching.